now going to invite the Deputy Commissioner of the ACC, Mr. Augustine Fegodi, to give us welcome statement. Let's put our hands together, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. All protocols observed. My responsibility this morning is to welcome you. This is the day the United Nations has put aside to observe Anti-Corruption Day. So as you are here joining the Anti-Corruption Commission to observe this day, on behalf of the Commission, I welcome you all.
CAL, the Center for Accountability and the Rule of Law, is led by Mr. Ibrahim Tami, and he's one of the supporters and organizers of this program. Let's welcome Mr. Tami, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I bring you greetings from the Center for Accountability and Rule of Law. We are all assembled here this morning to commemorate the International Anti-Corruption Day, which is an opportunity to celebrate the gains that we are making in the fight against corruption, but to also reflect on the many significant challenges that persist in our collective efforts to combat corruption. The Center for Accountability and Rule of Law, and many thanks to the UK Department for International Development, as well as the leadership of Christian Aid, is pleased to have partnered with the Anti-Corruption Commission to observe this year's International Anti-Corruption Day. At CAL, we believe that Leone should be governed by the principle of rule of law, in which all persons, institutions, and the state are accountable to a set of laws which are accessible to all, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated. We want to help to build the culture of accountability, a just, corrupt-free, and prosperous society. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, none of this is going to happen if we cannot give a full and frank account of public resources managed by public officials. Certainly not if contracts continue to be astronomically inflated, only to line up the pockets of a few. Certainly we are not going to address poverty or get to where we want to be if we continue to undervalue taxes to benefit a few. Sierra Leone has had a long and difficult battle with corruption. It's a scourge that remains a critical binding constraint to our country's development aspirations. There can be no doubt that all forms of corruption are bad, but clearly I'm sure we all agree that grand corruption hurts us the most. And don't get me wrong, I believe that we should go after all forms of corruption, but clearly grand corruption hurts us the most, which is why, again, with support from DFID and with leadership from Christian Aid, CAL has commissioned two important studies. One is a study on corruption and a corruption perception study. Both studies, we hope, the outcome of both studies, we hope will not only inform the Anti-Corruption Commission in terms of this programming, but we guide all of us, non-state actors, as well as the government of Sierra Leone in our collective efforts to combat corruption. In concluding, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to acknowledge and commend the ongoing giant strides made by the Anti-Corruption Commission, particularly its leadership, to combat corruption in Sierra Leone. We are extremely proud of the progress that we have seen, especially in the last 2 years. But of course, the job is not done yet. There's a long, long way to go, which is why we urge everyone, again, as our theme for today's state, we've got to unite against a common enemy. Corruption helps no one. It helps no one, not even those who partake of it. I want to congratulate the ACC, and I'm happy for the partnership. Going forward, our job will be to support, but of course, to hold the Commission itself accountable. Thank you very much for your audience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tami. Let's give Mr. Tami one more round of applause, not only for his statement today, but for being one of the most consistent voices against corruption in the states, in this country, and across different administrations. We all know how hard that can be in this jurisdiction. They are Sierra Leone's biggest and most consistent supporters, friends of the Anti-Corruption Commission, and they are UK aid. I'm delighted to welcome His Excellency, the British High Commissioner to Sierra Leone, Simon Mustard. Let's put our hands together, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Just picking up on the theme of our previous speaker, I think it's important to start out by emphasising that our work is not indeed done and the battle against corruption continues. I'd like to very much echo my esteemed colleague in starting off with that particular message. Esteemed guests, dignitaries, all protocols observed, it's a pleasure to be here today on International Anti-Corruption Day. This isn't something that we all do or participate in because it's a nice thing to do, it feels academically right, or because we've read it in books or newspapers. It is because corruption really does matter. It really does affect people's lives from the top to the bottom of society and across every single sector. It diverts resources. It deepens and empowers poverty and inequality. It prevents businesses from expanding and from creating jobs, which all Sierra Leoneans aspire to have. And it impacts on basic services like education and health. So it matters for all of those critical reasons. As the UK, as one of your long-standing and historic partners, we welcome efforts by this government and indeed its officials and civil society to take the fight for corruption forward and upwards. Now more than ever, more funds are being recovered from corrupt practices in the public and private sector. More cases, slowly but surely, are coming to the Anti-Corruption Court. And indeed, your government has been helping the UK chase down funds that have been lost by British firms and British people in corrupt practices. And for that, we are very, very grateful. This battle, of course, needs to be led from the very top by His Excellency the President, the Vice President, Cabinet Ministers and others. They need to send a powerful and strong signal to all of Sierra Leone society, public and private sector, that they will not tolerate corruption in any form, tightening up loopholes in procurement and public finance management. We welcome, for example, recent moves on this behalf. The Anti-Corruption Amendment Act this year is an important legislative step forward, and we hope it can be implemented fully and fairly as quickly as possible. Structures are also being strengthened. Of course, our own support with partners to the work of the Anti-Corruption Commission is important, but working alongside the government and the development donors, strengthen the judiciary, including the Anti-Corruption Division of the High Court, which sends again a very powerful signal of the importance and seriousness your government and your international partners take the issue of corruption. We've supported our esteemed colleagues, the Centre for Accountability and the Rule of Law, and of course the Institute of Governance Reform and Christian Aid have been key partners in that, and we stand with you as this important work continues in the coming months and years. We are of course also heavily involved in the education sector, helping His Excellency and this government work on their continued aspiration for free education for all. And again, that cannot take place in isolation without efforts on corruption continuing to free up public funds and public investment in schools. As I said at the start, and as my esteemed colleague said in his speech, this isn't just because it is nice to do, it is because it matters to the future, the very fabric of this country. Our partners our friends. Every aspect of society is affected by corruption, public, private sector, civil society. We have a fundamental duty to the people of this great country to keep tackling it in all of its forms wherever we find it, seeking transparency, accountability and action where we can. Best of luck to your continued work and everybody's endeavours. You will find the UK a steadfast and permanent ally in this work. Thank you very much.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, one of the high points of these occasions often is when we get a chance to listen to the man who has come to symbolize the fight against corruption in this country. As they said in the speech, and saying that the Ben we know the Ben, the Baba we know the joke with, the high bab man we they on a mission. We know he's fearless, we know he has a lot of integrity, and he's ready for the fight. Let's welcome my friend and brother, the Commissioner of the Anti-Corruption Commission and a leader in this country, Mr. Francis Kaifala.
The Minister of State, Office of the Vice President, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, ministers, heads of departments and agencies in the country, the Lord Ombudsman, the Archbishop of Freetown, the Chief Imam of Sierra Leone and Freetown, distinguished clerics and religious leaders, distinguished guests, and members of my team at the ACC and those representing the 4th Estate, I greet you all. Today is the day when we come together and reflect over what has happened throughout the year in the fight against corruption, and then use that to plan ourselves and to reposition ourselves for what is to happen in the next year. We at the ACC remain committed to the fight against corruption. This agenda which we are taking forth builds into the agenda of His Excellency the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, Brigadier Retired Julius Maada Bio, who made a clear, unequivocal statement on what this is about this morning, a televised statement that was done to the nation where he renewed the commitment of his government to the fight against corruption, stated unequivocally his support for the ACC to push the fight forward, and also brought out our successes and challenges and required us to do more. We are thankful to our partners, and that includes not only the international community that support our work, but even the members of various institutions in Sierra Leone, from the police, the military, the Office of the Ombudsman, the powerful leadership of the National Public Procurement Authority, the officers in the Financial Intelligence Unit, and all other stakeholders. The message is going, and we are very happy at the ACC. There is a united cloud against corruption. As I speak to you, Sierra Leone just courageously passed the strongest law in Africa for the fight against corruption. It is a law that is going to be the example in Africa. Already we are being contacted from all over the world, asking us for that blueprint, including places like Liberia, Namibia, Ghana, and even Nigeria, for us to share with them the foundational belief behind this law that we have passed. Laws are useless if the people cannot enforce them. Laws are useless if the country for which it is passed does not fully appreciate the spirit behind it and the commitment to ensuring that the anomaly in respect of which is past is dealt with seriously. But also, and most importantly, the seriousness with which a people take a problem in their country is shown by the type of law they pass to address it. Therefore, a strong law shows that we are committed, in mind at least, and in spirit, to challenge this scourge. And I want all of us to clap ourselves as a country for taking this bold step. To complete that cyclone that is building around corruption, today, as I speak here, the Chief Justice will be commissioning and opening the Special Court for Corruption at the Law Courts building. So we now have a commission that is showing to the people of Sierra Leone that we are ready to fight corruption. We have a judiciary that has shown that is ready to take up the challenge with us, and the Chief Justice and his team have shown considerable commitment and support to our efforts. We have a president who has shown that he has the heart and the backbone to support us. We have a people who, now than ever, do not take issues of corruption lightly. In fact, the people are now so committed to the fight against corruption that they are the ones setting the pace for Sierra Leone. Let us put our hands together for the people of Sierra Leone. That said, I would like to bring it to the attention of the people. We know the expectations are high. We have set very high standards for ourselves, and we are committed to maintaining it. But we are also bringing to the attention of the people that the commission is an evidence-led commission. It is not every rumor that you hear that has a basis for the Anti-Corruption Commission to jump into quick action. It is not every speculation that is out there that will make the Anti-Corruption Commission to arrest people and embarrass them. We deal with evidence, and it does not have to be high evidence. We just need a lead, something which we can hold on to be able to institute action. So whilst we are all in high gear to tackle corruption once and for all, and we are very happy about it, we are also encouraging you to help us take us to the lead, or direct us where we can go for the evidence, so that when we act decisively. And if anyone is asking questions, we are ready to face that person irrespective of who they are or where they come from. 4 things have to be in place for corruption to be defeated. And I've always said this. And I'll repeat them again. And I've repeated them to Africa. 1, we need a presidential will. Most times in Africa, presidential will has been mistaken for political will. They are not the same. We have many countries where there is presidential will, but the lack of political will has crippled even the president to be able to achieve his goal. In Ghana, for example, we are facing the same situation. We have faced the situation in Kenya. We have seen the situation in places in Southern Africa. But when we have the presidential will, there has to be the political will supporting the presidential will, and the political will goes beyond the president. There are countries where the president is in fact weak. Weak not in physical sense, but because the structures around him are such that he cannot act. Either because the judiciary is very powerful, either because the legislature is very powerful, or because the political parties that put him in power are very powerful. So the structures around him, though he may have the presidential will available, do not allow him to act. So, if even you have a president who believes in the fight against corruption and committed to it, if he does not have the support of the judiciary, the legislators, the ministers who are in cabinet, and even the political structures in the country, and sometimes even the people, corruption cannot be defeated. So the president will be left to his rhetorics, and the country will fail. So, number 2, there has to be political will, and we are encouraging our people to keep an eye on that and push our legislators and our political actors and even the judiciary to act in that regard. Third and most importantly, the people who fight corruption, when there is a political will and there is presidential will, have to have the courage to take the fight forward. And again, in certain countries, this is the problem. You will have a president who makes all the promises he can. You may have the political actors who put in place all they should. And then they entrust the fight against corruption to certain people. And those people have no courage and backbone to take the fight forward. The president will fail, the political system will fail, and the country will fail. So pillar number 3 has to be standing. Pillar number 4 is that there has to be the accurate, correct, and strong law. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I can say this without doubt, that I am at least sure that we have a very strong presidential will in the fight against corruption. I am also similarly strong and very sure that we have a very strong law to fight corruption. I am absolutely sure in my mind that we who are fighting corruption at the ACC and all our stakeholders are very ready to take on the fight. What remains measurable is the political will. And that is going to be tested when people who believe that they are sacred cows, who believe they should not follow procedures in institutions, they should hire whoever they feel like hiring, who believe that because of the roles they have played in political parties, they are above everyone else. When those people, the evidence falls in our hands, that they are at least answerable for their actions, and we go after them, and then we will gauge the political will. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that is the project we are working on. We will continue doing what we can for the country. We are committed to this, and the agenda which we are following is the agenda of the president and his government. We as an independent institution have our mandate, and this is very clear. I will continue to take it forward. On behalf of myself, my Deputy Commissioner Mr. Gobi, the directors of the ACC, the managers and staff of the ACC, we are encouraging Sierra Leone to stand behind us. The only way we can defeat corruption is when we do what we can, and all hell loses around us. When we look back, the people are standing. It will be very disheartening when those who are leading the war, like Okonkwo did, and then he slashed the head of whosoever he thought was a culprit. And the first thing he heard was his own people asking, why did he do it? For our people not to ask us, why did he do it? Let them say, this is why he did it, because the country has suffered so long, and we have to change the story of this country. I thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to invite somebody we had announced earlier, but we understand has joined us, and just because they are such a good friend of the Commission in this country, have been a very consistent friend of our country over the years. I want to invite His Excellency, the Dean of Diplomatic Corps in Sierra Leone, as well as the Nigerian High Commissioner, his Ambassador Dr. Abis Ibrahim Ubada. Please join us in the stage, sir.
The Honorable Vice President, Mr. Mohamed Juldeh Jalloh, the organizers of this very important occasion, top government officials here present, members of the diplomatic corps and consular corps, members of the ministers present here, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the organizers of this conference for the privilege given to me to speak on the topic of corruption. In a gathering like this, I am indeed humbled. Well, I have prepared a little note on the topic, I would like to share with you a titled Corruption, the Bane of Our Society. Let me start by trying to define the word corruption. As it entails, corruption is a form of dishonesty or criminal activity undertaken by a person or organization entrusted with a position of authority, often to acquire illicit benefit or abuse of a trusted power for one's position again. It is inducement to wrongdoing by an improper or unlawful means such as bribery. The meaning of the word corruption as per dictionary is dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power, typically involving bribery. Simply put, we can describe corruption as cheating, stealing, and lying. This definition touched all the fundamentals and different strata of life. This scourge called corruption is like an ill wind that blows no good at all. It is an epidemic that must be fought and dealt with right from the fabrics. This epidemic, unfortunately, is a worldwide phenomenon, and it is indeed tearing system apart. However, the degree and level of corruption differ from one continent to another. In the Western world, Asia and America, the root problem is being tackled headlong. The fight to stamp out this scourge is done with all sincerity of purpose. Today, these continents are far ahead of Africa because no country develops with corrupt people, especially government officials in continents who loot the public treasury for their selfish aggrandizement. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is very worrisome and sad to note that corruption in the continent of Africa is alarming, so much so that one could even see it as being an entrenched and institutionalized in the running of government businesses. Provide electricity and potable water for the citizenry. No nation can develop without these indices. In underdeveloped and leaves us with the name third world. Distinguished guests, it is shameful to note most of us seated here knowing the ill that corruption does in the life of our nations. Yet we do nothing to correct or curb the menace and dangers inherent. Posterity and generations of our unborn children will not forgive the negative role we have played and still playing in aiding and abetting these criminalities. Have I used my position to deprive fellow countrymen and women from having good medical care or potable water? Have I ruined the chances of children having sound education in this country? What will I be remembered for when I leave this world? Judicious utilization of public funds under your control will speak for you. Integrity is the watchword. I say integrity is the watchword. We must begin to see integrity as a virtue to behold we must learn to be men and women of honor. Let us begin to create legacies that will with our destiny collectively. We must know where we are coming from and where we are going to as a people. We must start building institutions if we are serious as a people to fight the scourge of corruption. When there are institutions that are functional and well-funded without interference from any quarters in terms of influencing their findings, then we will start seeing changes in our society. The presidential system that most African countries seem to have adopted must be seen in the light that separation of power is not a factor for negotiation. The three main arms of government, that is executive, legislative, and the judiciary, must be independent of one another, performing their traditional roles without interference. When there are stronger states, the stronger state institutions, then corruption is half tackled. They serve as the police of the state. When criminals, looters, bribe givers, and takers are punished severely for their offenses by our judicial system, then we will begin to see changes. When looters and corrupt government officials and all other accomplices are not given public or societal recognition, then we will begin to see changes. When integrity of labor, hard work is recognized and given public and national honor, then we will begin to see changes. It is time for Africa to rise up and walk the talk. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, permit me to draw a few examples using my country, Nigeria, before now. Please, the time given to me is, I'm very sorry, I came here a little bit late because I was from another function, but corruption, you need to bring certain things out that people will come to know and respect. Permit me to draw the few examples by using my country, Nigeria, before now. My country has identified corruption as a deadly cancer that bedevils us as a people. But this hasn't been enough political will to tackle this scourge until the drawing of what I call a new era. We have the new era here in the country today. But there hasn't been enough will, I say, tackle this scourge until this is done. Okay, when His Excellency President Mohamed Buhari, GCFR, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, assumed office in 2015 with their assets under an oath before taking public office. This helps to checkmate and at the same time monitor how public officers, holders acquire wealth. The police force has been strengthened to enforce the law on whoever that breaks the law. The judiciary is not left out in this equation. I am sure you must have read how monies have been recovered and high-profile personalities that have been found guilty and sentenced in Nigeria. There should not be any sacred cows in the fight against corruption. Corrupt government officials must face the full to others in the society who are next coming up day after these people. I am particularly pleased with the steps the present regime of His Excellency, President Julius Madabiu, GCRSL, is taking to stem this scourge. This is evident in the establishment of Commission of Inquiry and the empowerment given to Anti-Corruption Commission, ACC. These are steps in the right direction to put the country back to her feet. As I leave the stage, let me tell the good people of Sierra Leone, not in this fight, it is a fight of good faith that must be won by all of us. I therefore kindly request that all hands must be on deck to assist President Julius Maada to actualize the good vision he has for this very country. My Sierra Leone fellow member, brothers and sisters, please, let's put our hands together to fight corruption that is eating down in Africa countries. I thank you all.
Our keynote speaker perhaps needs no introduction whatsoever, but I shall do so. He was born in the Kano district by parents from Putloko district. He is a devout Muslim who attended Islamic primary school and later graduated to the Koidu Secondary School. He attained his advanced level qualifications at the Ahmadiyya Muslim Secondary School in Freetown. He graduated with a Bachelor of Arts from the Forbay College, University of Sierra Leone, before moving to Nigeria, where he obtained his Master of Science in Political Sciences from the University of Ibadan. Following his solid academic track records, he was admitted to a PhD program where he obtained his doctorate degree from the Institute of Public Sciences at the University of Bordeaux in France. He started his professional career in the United Nations in March 2000, working as a program officer at the United Nations in Kosovo. Until recently, when he assumed the second highest seat in the Republic of Sierra Leone, he worked as a senior advisor at the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Mali. He also supported Campaign for Good Governance program on public policy analysis and research, including leading the study on quality education in Sierra Leone with other stakeholders. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker for this auspicious event this afternoon is none other than the Right Honorable Dr. Mohamed Juldeh Jalloh, the Vice President of the Republic of Sierra Leone.
Thank you very much. Kindly sit down, please. Thank you very much, Madam, for that very short introduction. And I'm very delighted that you did mention that I participated in a study that was jointly conducted by the Anti-Corruption Commission, Oxfam, Search for Common Grounds, and Campaign for Good Governance on Quality Education in 2003. At that time, we wanted to decipher exactly the ups and downs of the Education for All project. That was no doubt a very fine beginning into what I call a deep insight into the educational sector. Today, we were invited by the House of Representatives, the House of Parliament, in a celebration, the Open Day, Parliament Open Day. And while I was delivering my keynote address, I tried to capture the essence of an institution like Parliament within the context of state collapse in Africa. That the reasons over the years in the 50s, 60s, 70s, up to the 80s and 90s, that states collapsed in Africa, meaning ran out of relevance, characterized by massive corruption, decadence, coups, demonstrations, and civil strife. is because the first generation of African leaders, did they realize that building a society, building a functional state, is only about building schools, roads, and hospitals. So the generation of African leaders today are of the realization that if you don't build a very strong economy, create an opportunity for private sector development, to have the resources you need to support your social sector, make no mistake, the state will collapse. Because you cannot continue to give what you don't have. If you don't have resources, if you don't generate revenue, you don't have resources. So today, I want to put education as an indicator or a measuring instrument to measure the rise and fall of states. Make no mistake, if you want to adequately measure state collapse and also capture the efforts that countries are making to put their state back on track, just go and measure what is happening in the educational sector. The collapse, the level of collapse of an educational sector is directly linked to the problematic functioning of the public sector. So today I want to capture in this keynote address, share with you some of my views. As you can see, I wrote them by myself yesterday night on my own hands because I think events like these, we need to share our own experiences and perspective so that at least people could understand where we stand and how we intend to address what we all see today as a deep-seated malaise in the education sector. First, I want to thank the ACC to invite me to this occasion. I never realized that they knew I'd done some in this country. Yes, on a topic that is so to me as an individual and also that is so relevant to the new direction. Because you will agree with me that this topic is not only timely, but it is more and more relevant to the new direction policy on free quality education. This government focuses entirely its energy on human capital development, essentially on the education sector. And that is driven by the deep-seated belief that education is a key element in our development trajectory. During the several campaign and political meetings we had over this country, across this country, over a long period of time, if you could remember, one of the things that His Excellency usually says is that when you want to destroy a nation, you don't need to give them weapons. And when you destroy the educational sector, the education foundation of that nation, you destroy that nation. That is why we as students of African politics over the years have been using education as an indicator to measure what I call the rise and fall of African states. Therefore, today, if this sector that is so dear to our heart is bedeviled by widespread corruption, it means essentially that our development prospects will be derailed. Today, several studies have indicated that there is a very strong connection between corruption and the development of nations. That I've already highlighted. Despite the efforts this government have invested to fight corruption, it will interest you to know that we still have a long way to go to address and deal with that malaise. Today, this country stands at 130 out of 176 countries in the Transparency International Index. Recently, you will all recall that through the effort of the ACC, massive corruption in the conduct of examinations at all levels have been unearthed. It has become a routine exercise for most schools and colleges. This situation is very sad, and like most of the panelists stated, it's unacceptable. Therefore, there's an urgent need to stop this slide and restore sanity in a once prided sector. But this is the first thing I want to share with you, that to properly articulate or provide a refreshing insight into the nexus between accountability regimes and ensuring quality education in Sierra Leone, we need to critically look into both the long-term and proximate causes of the collapse of the entire educational sector over the decades. It is clearly evident that over the decades, there has been what I call the progressive disengagement or the progressive decline in quality delivery and output in the educational sector. It didn't start today, it started a long time ago. Now it is getting to a very problematic height. Once prided as the best you could get in Black Africa since the 50s leading up to the mid-80s, today we are struggling with the problematic dynamics of decadence in the educational sector. I don't need to highlight the recent horrible stories. I guess several speakers before me have already done that, and the panelists have done justice to that. But you will agree with me that the situation is very worrying and to a large extent constitutes one of the single most important threats to His Excellency's flagship program on education. This appalling decadence cannot be divorced from the systematic disengagement of the state, to be more specific, government from the education sector. This disengagement has been characterized by starving the educational sector with the required resources to enable the sector functions, both in its administrative and academic forms. We have witnessed over the decades how this sector has been starved of resources it needs. This was made worse in the 80s by stringent external conditionalities that further forced successive governments to cut down much needed subsidies to that sector. The catastrophic impact of reduced and inadequate resources to the education sector means educational outfits were forced to fend for themselves. This involves limited resources to pay for infrastructure, teaching and learning materials. Classrooms began to be bloated. Libraries disappeared in schools. The teaching and learning profession became less attractive. Or, the last resort, universities begin to lose the status of teaching and research institutions, focusing only on teaching. They became mere mechanical and functional instruments. We lost the universities as institutions capable of supporting our development drive, apart from producing skilled manpower. Over the years, we gradually see how the educational sector was abandoned, up to a point that a former senior political colleague in this country said it was a privilege. It tells you that those who do not have that privilege were left to fend for themselves in schools that are under-resourced, under-managed, and became less productive. I think, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is where we need to locate the history of the collapse of the educational sector. Although today we all cry the state it has reached, but it is interesting that we locate it, because if you want to reverse that trend, you have to put it in that proper context. The situation became even more complicated as academic institutions became centers of contestations, recurrent strikes, and vivid symbols of state collapse. In 2004, 2003, when I was leading that study on education, quality education, I recruited a lot of university graduates at that time. I was virtually teaching them basic quantitative research methods. So what we are seeing today is a product of history. Because when you have in 2004 graduates that are struggling to understand the dynamics of simple research methods, they become teachers in secondary schools. You can imagine what they are going to teach. And you can imagine what will be the output of their students. So this was the same situation that started decentralizing, declining into the schools, primary and secondary schools. Wherein, like I said, these schools became institutions that look after themselves. Because if government does not look after public schools, what do you expect? The schools are going to look after themselves. And what does that mean? Overtaxing parents, no respect for quality, breakdown in total supervision and inspections of schools. When we were doing the free quality education survey in 2003, this is 2003, talking about 16 years, we realized that quality, levels of comprehension were very, very low. At that time, we wrote a report where we were all over the radio criticizing the minister at that time, was Honorable Alfa-Uri, was the minister at that time, criticizing the government up to a point that the then vice president at that time asked me whether I'm really an SAPP child. But we were pushing a campaign that by 2003, there was what I refer to in the report, a de facto privatization of public schools. Which means that government was claiming before, since the 80s, government claiming that they are putting a lot of resources into a sector that is not reflective in the output. So the essence of that study was to go to the schools, look at the state of infrastructure, assess teaching, assess learning material, assess inspection, and we realized that these schools were nothing less but private, de facto private schools. Inspectors don't go there. They sit down at home, and headmasters come to these inspectors to tell them what is happening in these schools. More importantly, that was the period wherein the President Kaba government was paying huge subsidies to schools. So what you have was not only a combination of ghost children, you have ghost children and ghost teachers. Ghost children because they were bloating the school register to get more money. Ghost teachers because the principals, nobody resigned. So once you are enrolled as a teacher, you remain. In those days, we wrote very excellent report, contrary to the complaint of the Auditor General. Those reports we are listening to. I was invited to the Minister of Education at that time. We sat down and we started to explain, section by section, what we saw, what we observed, and how to correct them. That was the starting point for the minister that time. I was very courageous. Because at those days, ministers don't sit down with civil society organizations. But we sat down, we were able to look into those reports and take some of the critical recommendations. Because I told them, if you don't do something, the entire educational system will collapse. So today, I want to state categorically that you cannot fix the malaise in this sector essentially through one single approach. We need to combine both process, structural, and societal approaches to fighting corruption in the education sector. Process. You know, the last time I was here, I said you have two approaches to fighting corruption. One is the process approach where you establish institutions like the ACC to take punitive actions. The ACC alone cannot fight corruption, cannot address the decline. The second approach is the structural approach, which governments need to undertake massive reforms. That is why, as a government, we decided to put 22% of the budget in the education. We have decided that to improve quality, we are recruiting additional thousands of teachers. If you know the amount of money every month that government dish out to supporting the free quality education, I was telling the president the last time that when people talk about bread and butter issues, I say every month government is putting billions and billions of leons into the school system. And those billions of leons used to come from the pocket of poor parents. So today poor parents have additional money, savings, to take care of their family. That is direct bread and butter issue. This government entire expenditure, 22% of what we get as a government put it to education. We know we still have to do more. We have undertaken a series of reforms, not only focusing on the education sector, but also on the public sector, the public service, because teachers are also public servants. We have to look after them. Because when you improve conditions of service, you get more resources to the school, you build infrastructures. Every day, as a vice president, I'm the most traveled government official into the provinces. And every village I visit, the first demand that will come to you is we need more classrooms. Because today, out of every 10 Sierra Leonean kids, 8 are rushing to the schools because they are free. We need to cope with the infrastructural expansion. And as we are moving towards expanding that space for every Sierra Leonean kid to have an opportunity to go to school, we also have to invest the resources to get the infrastructure to accommodate that. These are some of the structural things we are doing to combine, to support the process-driven approaches undertaken by the ACC today. Another approach, which I will refer to as the societal approach, but which, if you listen to developmentalist theories, they will call it the developmental approach. Well, I will call it the societal approach. It entails looking at the educational sector as an entity, or more or less as an ecosystem, one that hinges on many socio-political and economic fronts. However, you must realize that this sector is pulled from different angles, and we need to bring all those actors to understand that building a viable educational sector does not depend on one actor, on one entity alone. You will agree the ACC have brought the stark reality of the dysfunctionment within that sector, particularly syndicates that are beyond imagination. I've already stated that government could provide resources to enhance proper functionality, but other key players, pupils, students, teachers, parents, board of directors, university courts will also have to think creatively how to get this sector back on track. It is in that light that government has established an interministerial committee on education to critically look at this sector and, more importantly, encourage a big national dialogue on the future of education. Because we are going to talk about this. We are going to get Sierra Leoneans to think critically. Because, like I said, the educational sector is an indicator to measure state collapse. So if we want to build the state, if we want to build the state, put the state back on track, allow the state to play its primordial role of providing essential services, then we need to get the education sector right. Each key player will have to take responsibility for moving this sector forward. I am convinced, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that accountability regimes encompassing both process approach as I have described it, structural approach that is rooted in government reforms to support the sector to grow, to have the resources, both human capital, both human, financial and material resources, and the societal approach bringing key players is vital to addressing the malaise in the educational sector and will help us, no doubt, halt the declining slide in that sector. But to do this, for these approaches to be viable and for the result or outcome of these regimes needs to be measured and, if possible, benchmarked. This is where government institutions, particularly the ACC, institutions like the ACC and a variety of educational actors needs to build strategic partnership with civil society organizations and other agencies involved in the sector. Because usually state-centered approaches have their own limits. But when you bring in community-based organizations, civil society organizations, they will going to have their own added value. That is where the societal approach comes in. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude at this stage by stating that as a government, we are already paying 22% of the budget on education. But mind you, resources alone cannot reverse the trend. We need a combination of so many other things that I've just agreed on. Process, structural, and societal approach. Today, the future, the free quality education is not only a flagship program. I tell people, it is our life because it has to succeed. Because it is the lifeline of our development prospect. We cannot afford the cost of a downward slide in the education sector. The costs are just too huge. And for a government that wants to put Sierra Leone back on the right track for development, focusing essentially on human capital development, we have to do something. And we believe collectively we owe it to this nation and future generations to do something. And I'm convinced today, well satisfied, that the actions of the ACC, the ongoing reforms in the educational sector, and some of the issues that the panelists have been grappling with, there is no doubt that
these are very promising steps in our effort to ensure quality education in this country. Thank you very much.